I bring you Christian Williams, author of Our Enemies in Blue, Police and Power in America. Hey Christian, how the fuck are you?
Oh, I'm fine.
So what the fuck is the police?
Well, the modern police as an institution are characterized chiefly by having a general law enforcement authority in a particular geographic area, usually a municipality, so a city. They're also professional as opposed to volunteer, paid by salary as opposed to fee, and maintain a 24-hour service with continuity of personnel.
And what the fuck is their function?
My argument in Our Enemies in Blue is that the main function of the police actually has very little to do with crime or enforcing the law, and is more directed toward maintaining existing social inequality, especially those based on race and class.
Prove it.
Well, if you look at how the police developed historically, they evolved from a previous institution called the slave patrols, which were specifically intended to control the black population, especially the slave population in the South. And as cities began industrializing and the owners of slaves began renting them out within cities for industrial efforts, it changed the mechanisms of control for slavery. And the slave patrols relatively quickly developed the characteristics of the modern police force. So looking at it historically, we can see how it evolved with that aim in mind, and with crime control as sort of a secondary feature. And in fact, if you look at the institutional changes that have occurred since then, or even the behavior of individual officers as they make their decisions at sort of the day-to-day, the law is a very weak indicator of what the police are likely to do. But social stratification is a very strong indicator. So in general, the police tend to behave in ways that protect the interests of the powerful and keep the powerless powerless.
Come on, give me some examples.
If you look at the history of the police in the civil rights movement, it's pretty interesting that when there was legal segregation, the police tended to behave in ways that reinforced segregation. In the period after legal segregation, the police still tend to behave in ways that reinforce de facto segregation. So things like the persistence of racial profiling, for example, has been demonstrated in every serious study to have no real crime-fighting benefit. But it has very clear function as far as keeping people of color out of particular areas, keeping them in a subordinate position, keeping them under the surveillance of the criminal justice system, and keeping them sort of occupied by the different aspects of the criminal justice system. First at the level of disproportionate attention to the police, but then getting them in the system so that they're more likely to be arrested, they're more likely to be put in jail, they're more likely to experience the use of force at the hands of the cops.
Okay, check this out. Let's say I'm at a protest just minding my own fucking business with my bike, and a cop starts pushing me and I throw my bike at him. What the fuck would happen?
Well, I mean, the police would certainly use violence in response, and it would almost certainly be violence vastly out of proportion to the violence that you used in attacking the officer.
As Nigel pointed out, at big protests the police are looking more and more like the army. Can you tell me the fucking reason why?
In the US in the 1960s, the police were, their main way of responding to demonstrations was a model called escalated force, which basically meant that the police would issue orders and then would back up those orders with physical violence, and that they would increase their violence proportionate to the amount of resistance that they got from the crowd. This led to repeated disasters of various kinds. On the one hand, it had political problems because it was not particularly popular to see, the Birmingham police using police dogs against nonviolent civil rights demonstrators. On the other hand, it tended to escalate the disorder, so that the police would escalate force and then the crowd would escalate force in response. And things that may have started as very small skirmishes ended up being massive unrest that lasted for days. So in part because of the reaction of the police. So the federal government set up these commissions, these bodies of experts, to investigate the causes of urban rioting, campus unrest, dissent in general, and to formulate recommendations as to how they could be handled better. And the most famous of these was called the Kerner Commission. And one of their explicit recommendations was that police departments needed to be able to respond to civil disorder the way the military did. And part of the reason for that was that the military was, where they were deployed to do crowd control, they were used to working as a unit. They were used to maintaining rigid discipline, such that, if they were told to, stand on a corner and hold that post and not to worry about what was happening a block away, they would do that. If they were told to show themselves conspicuously and advance in a steady march with bayonets, they would do that. Whereas the cops were used to working either independently or in twos. And so the same level of coordination wasn't there and the same level of discipline wasn't there, which led the police to repeatedly break ranks, to really sabotage the organizational strategy for the sake of a short-term tactical gain. And in general, were far less successful in either containing rioters or dispersing protests than the military was. So one of the Kerner Commission's explicit recommendations was that when unrest occurred, the police needed to very quickly be able to convert themselves into something more like a military unit. And this has, in the 40 years since then, changed almost everything about policing. So that it's changed the way the cops are trained, it's changed the way they're deployed, it's changed the equipment that they're used, and it's really got underway the process that we now call militarization.
And finally, donuts. What's the fucking story?
The former Seattle chief of police, Norm Stamper, wrote a very good memoir called Breaking Rank, which has a chapter on police and donuts. And his argument is that they start rookies with the overnight shift. And there are very, very few places in most cities that are open at like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning where they can get lunch. And so the cops tend to eat a lot of donuts because the donut shops are open at that time.